Okay.
transportation. So I guess you guys let me know if anyone has not seen it, or just to kind of get the mood set, if we want to go ahead and take about 4 minutes to all take a look at the link. Does that sound?
Has everybody? Okay. Yep, we can do that.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So, well, let's just go ahead and start here. And if she hasn't told you a little bit about me, my name is Kimberly, and there is a little bit of a typo on the advertisement that went out via social media. I'm no longer with Grafton. I'm actually transitioning into starting my own company. So I have been working in a contract capacity with multiple vendors, basically doing what I do, which is negotiations and event management and operations, but more on a global scale for multiple companies. And the name of my company is Shadows at the end, so you'll be able to reach me if needed. But I did want to kind of have it lead with the video because I think it kind of speaks for itself, and then we can tap out. So if everybody has the link, if they want to pull it up. And we'll give it about 4 minutes. Everyone can just view. And you can put your phone on mute, so there's no. So if everyone goes to the first slide, there is a reason outside of it just being a musically driven, exciting, wake me up at 7 p.m., 6 p.m. Central Time video, and to get everybody engaged. It was really meant to kind of overwhelm you with a lot of information about transportation, because one of the core challenges in event management is that we're thinking about a lot of different pieces to the puzzle that we're in charge of putting together to create a creative picture for our guests. But we have to step outside of ourselves and sometimes step outside of our role and look at it from the view of the guest, the person who doesn't have the information, or the person who doesn't know the timings or what you've been discussing with your client, or what you're trying to execute for the theme of the event. They are the person that just received an invite and says, you need to come to this place at this time. And this is what they see. They see all the different options. Am I going to fly? Am I going to drive? Are we going to Uber? Are we going to taxi? Do I take the subway? So it's really up to us to kind of guide them through this part of the conversation so that there is no opportunity for them to get lost. Because if they get lost, they don't show up. And if they don't show up, our event is not a success. So, to start with the first slide. And the slides were a little bit more interactive. Again, technical difficulties. It's just showing up as a slide. But I promise you, it was a lot more fun. So we start with the first slide, which is the theme of the conversation today, is events and transportation and how it can make or break your event. So going to the next slide. So the slope between failure and success in events, we all know, is pretty thin and very slippery. Everything could seem to be going according to plan. Everything could be falling into place. But then in that one slight hiccup can basically be a cataclysmic event. The ball starts rolling, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger if we don't stop it. So we understand this from a vendor standpoint. We know that as planners, you have so much going on. Pat, the next slide. There's so many different balls in the air, so many different pieces, again, to your puzzle that you're responsible for putting together. You have your vendor relationships, pricing, manifest, which is the registration, the staffing, who's going to staff your event, venue management, access, who you have access and credentials to where you need to go, entertainment, and we're not even going to talk about logistics. So we understand that it's overwhelming and there's so many pieces that you get bogged down with. But surprisingly, there's one piece that's always missing. Does anybody know what that is? That next slide. What did you get?
Transportation.
Yes, you want a free trip.
Okay, can I go to Paris?
we will talk after this call. So again, transportation, surprisingly, is one of the last parts of the conversation in events. People who are accustomed to it and have been in that hiccup before where they make this fabulous event and they put everything together and they seal up all of their, dot all their I's and cross all of their T's, but then they get a week out and realize, well, wait a minute, how are we going to get there? How are we going to get them from the hotel, and that's the next slide, from the hotel, from the airport to the venue? If they want to go sightseeing, how are we going to move all of these people throughout the course of the period that we are hosting them? So all of those things are an important factor. And if not paid attention to meticulously, they can really impact your event in a negative way. So the next slide is, how accessible is your event? That's a core question that we recommend should be asked at the very beginning of your planning conversation. So when you sit down with your team and you come up with the idea for the event and you say, okay, well, this is what we want to do and this is what the client wants to do and we want it to be this amazing experience. During that conversation is when you need to answer the question, how accessible is your event? Because, as you know, you can have a wonderful idea that could take place at the top of the mountain, but if no one...
Lost it. Okay. Try again. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Actually, I think that was probably meant to be, because if you listen to the first thing that they said on that recording was directions on how to get to their property. So as I was stating before it came on, that should be part of the first planning conversation that you have, because you have to decide whether or not it's feasible to be able to execute your event according to your plan, because if it's not accessible, then it's going to have a difficulty in being successful. Next slide. So there's a couple of questions in that meeting that you should ask yourself and your partner when you're planning this portion in regards to transportation. One, the operational feasibility. In a lot of cases, especially if anyone has been to the Washington, D.C. metro area, we have an issue with accessibility. Not every area is allowable to enter without appropriate credentialing or access, or sometimes just because, it's a Tuesday. So you need to take a look at, when you're planning your event, how realistically and easily can we access this space, and how easily can our guests get to this space. The second question is taking a look at the participation total. The transportation can have a huge impact on the participation total. Let me give you an example. We have an event that happens every year. It's a fabulous event hosted by the Who's Who of DC, and it's at a hotel in downtown DC. The location is not the prime ideal location because there's no parking. So what ends up happening is every year we see a decrease in participation just simply because there's no real options for transportation. If people are in their black gowns, their black ties, they're not going to get on public transportation. So the only other option was possibly Uber or to secure a private vehicle to take you there, because parking is just not an issue. It's not an option. So what the partner ended up doing was taking a look at, okay, well, how do we maybe shuttle? We've had 2 years of decreased participation, so how can we address this issue? And early on in the planning phases, they had a conversation with their transportation partner to see how they could provide shuttling of the guests from a remote parking space. So that's one of the early on examples before we get into the make and break, but that was just one I wanted to address. Transportation can impact your schedules and timing. In a lot of cases when you're dealing with venues, you have a hard stop start and a hard stop time because it's the time that you've rented out the space. If you're bringing guests from multiple locations, you have to take into consideration how quickly you're able to get them there, especially if the numbers, which we all want, are high in volume. So again, having that conversation early on can assist you with planning your timings as you get into the scope of your event, the meat of your event. And the last, and most importantly, is transportation can severely impact your budget, for the good or for the bad. Earlier on in the event, when you're planning these things and you take a look at it, you can make adjustments or accommodations for some of the aforementioned obstacles, and you can work with your transportation provider to create workarounds that can pretty much save your budget. If not addressed, they can break it. Next slide. So saying all of what we discussed so far about all the different balls that you have in the air and the things that you're taking care of on the planning stages of your event, sometimes it's okay to just go ahead and say, you know what, I want to work with my transportation provider, I want to wave my white flag, and next slide, we suggest turning your transportation vendor into your event partner. Now, what that means is taking a look at how you engage with your transportation partner. Are you just sending them information and asking for a quote, or are you actually having a conversation with them and expressing to them what your ideas are, what your goals are, what your demographic is, and what you want to accomplish, what to you means a successful event, and then charging them to come up with solutions to those outline items that you expressed. Next slide. So, for instance, the reason we would suggest, especially with transportation that you've now taken on early on in the event planning stages, is the transportation specialist has several different benefits that they can offer that typically do not exist on an event planning team. One, the transportation specialists, they have equipment knowledge. So they have spent years perfecting the art of everything transportation, from the vehicle maintenance to driver quality to standards, things that have worked, things that don't work. They also know how to get around the mobility. They're able to make recommendations about accessibility, places where you may think you want to go, but you don't have access to, or you can get access if you get the proper credentials. So the transportation provider typically already knows that process and can take care of that on your behalf. But if you don't have that conversation with them, they won't know to be able to address those concerns. They also know what limitations you have about the actual vehicles themselves. So you may have an idea that you want to, let's say, showcase something on the equipment. You know, we had one event that they wanted to go into the city for a moonlight tour, and they wanted to have champagne and have dinner and all of these different things on the bus, which sounds like an amazing event that I should have been invited to and not work, but another conversation. But we had to advise them the different policies and procedures that DC has about those different things, and to help guide them into the planning so that they can give the same experience while following the law. So those are things that your transportation provider can kind of outline to you, again, during the station phase of that. Affiliate pricing is another benefit. As I said at the first line, there really is, I mean, we say competition, but it's very loosely used because we all pretty much work together to service events. Sometimes events can get so large that there's no way that one provider can service them all just with their fleet, so we work together to help make events successful. In that, there's a pricing model that we share with each other to bring them on. If there's an event that one particular provider is executing and they look for assistance from another, there's pricing already established in there. So when you have a discussion with your transportation provider, we suggest to not just discuss what you believe they're able to service, but tell them everything that you need. And again, charge them with finding the solutions, because at the end of the day, it would more than likely benefit you by going that route, because they have already negotiated pricing on your behalf. Engagement. How you engage with your transportation provider is important. In many cases, when you're scheduling an event, we know events sometimes just come up at the spur of the moment, or they come last minute, or it's something that you've known for a while, you just haven't had a moment to properly plan for it and get all of your ducks in a row. We suggest that when you're looking for a vendor, and we're no different than any other vendor, whether it's hotel or food and beverage, transportation is exactly the same. Loyalty begets benefits. It's the same thing with transportation. If you have an event at the early part of the year, but you know you're going to have one in the middle of the year and one potentially at the end of the year, discuss all three of them. Let them know, this is what I do throughout the year this is what my fiscal year is going to look like. These are the events that I have planned on the calendar. And I want to discuss how you can provide solutions for all of them, not just one. Because that lets the transportation company know that you are increasing the level of engagement, which will then be reflected in your quote. And then staff. Transportation specialists, again, the reason why we suggest to always look to your transportation provider to provide solutions is because their staff, again, know the equipment, they know the routes and the streets, and they know the services. So when it comes to events, you can go ahead and hand that piece off and let them take care of it, because if there are any of those hiccups, they have the foreknowledge to be able to, in that moment, create a solution for you rather than you trying to take away from what you do to provide a solution. So when you look at a transportation provider as a partner and you discuss with them all of your needs and how they can, again, provide solutions for you, one of the ways that they then take that information and decide, okay, well, how are we going to respond to this client, and what do we want to offer in return? Next slide. I call it STAR, but it basically means looking at the specifics, the transportation type, the amount of work, and the relationship, which is basically what I outlined mostly in the before slide, but just to kind of cut to the meat of it. The specifics is what's the scope of your event. The transportation type is the vehicle, and the amount of work is how often, and then all of that will determine the relationship, which again helps you with pricing. So taking a look at all of those things that slides 12 and 13, next slide, talked about, let's look at each of them specifically and how, I guess, the pros and cons. If you decide to go that route, how it can make your event, and potentially, if overlooked, how it could break your event. So if we take a look at the specifics, which is you coming to the transportation provider and saying, this is a dine around, this is a concierge hospitality night celebration, or this is a convention that all of our guests, all of our residents are going to. Outlining what the specifics are, and again, what your goal is for the event. What to you means that it's going to be a success. All of the different things that you're thinking about doing, even if it's something that is just a thought. We haven't solidified it yet, but this is what we're thinking about doing. After 9, we want to take them all out for a moonlight cruise. Lay it on the table so that the transportation provider can make the recommendation, say, okay, well, these are all the things that you're potentially going to need. So when you then go back to your planning committee, you can take that information back To give you an example, there are many times in the D.C. area that meetings take place on the Hill. People will come from a particular portion of the city, whether it's a hotel or it's a residence or it's a business, and they want to be transported up to Capitol Hill for a series of meetings. Depending on how many people it is, they may or may not have access. Or they could get access if we take them around the back into New Jersey Avenue, have the buses swept by the Secret Service, and then we escort them up. But in many cases, people come to the city and they're not familiar with that process, and they start planning. They go through the whole of the event, and then 2 to 3 weeks out, they say, now we want to take them all over. We just expect that we would go up to the Hill. So because the transportation provider didn't have that information in advance, they weren't able to get them the credentialing that they needed or circumvent the process to advise that maybe we'll break the bus into 2 small buses and the 2 smaller vans can go up to the Hill, the others not. But to make those types of recommendations. So that's where we let go over to the break side, where it's left unaddressed in totality, essential details of the event can be missed, which should essentially prevent transportation from executing a portion of your event in totality or according to your desired outcome or outline. So the sooner you're able to give as many specifics as you can, that allows the planning team to go behind the scenes and start putting together all of the things that are required to help make your event a success. The longer you don't provide or aren't able to provide that information, the more challenges you can expect to experience. Next slide. Transportation type. How can that make or break your event? So on the positive, on the pro side, allowing the transportation provider to capture, again, all of your needs and compare against their in-house fleet. So every company has a certain amount, a certain count of certain vehicles. And so when you come to them and you say, I'd like to have an event, this is what I'm going to need, the first thing they do before they quote it, they need to check and make sure that it's in-house, that it's available, it's not sold out, or inventory is low. And so the sooner you're able to get that information over, and again, even if it's something that you're just considering, you're not positive yet that that's the direction you want to go, lay it all on the table so that they can check for you everything that they have potentially and discuss with you your options. On the con side, the break side, if that information isn't provided, and as you start to near the event, it starts to come up that certain vehicles are needed, then again, we're checking inventory, and if for some reason they're not available, that can have a severely detrimental effect, not only on your service, but also, again, on your budget. One, because, again, if they don't have an fleet, they're going to go to their affiliate, and if their affiliates don't have an fleet, they may go to different affiliates that may not be their preferred vendor. And that pricing may not have been negotiated, so you're going to pay rack rates because it's a last-minute charge. So that, closer to your event, as you know, can destroy a budget, especially if it's something that you've set early on in the planning phase and had hoped to stay close to it. Now you've incurred an additional cost that afterwards is going to look negatively on the overall budget. Next slide. So the amount. So that's going back to how often you do events and what scope of events that you do. Let's say if you're in a residential property and you host events on a weekly basis for your residents, and it involves taking them on a midnight dine around or to different venues around the city. Some residential properties, corporate properties, they have weekly outings for their guests. They book tickets and they'll go to different concerts or different venues. I would recommend to give all of that information to your transportation provider. It is not in your favor to single out each event and have that discussion about each event. You want to have them look at everything that you do in totality. So when we talk about making or breaking your event, making is allowing the transportation provider to capture details regarding how many events you do, provide essential information to the vendor on how many opportunities they have to potentially work with you in the future. And this has a direct impact on pricing, which can help not only your single event budgets, but your program and your budgets as well. Breaking, and if it's never discussed, you can potentially miss out on an opportunity to choose the best vendor. So going back to getting information last minute puts the transportation provider in a position to have to find you an immediate solution, which may not be the preferred solution on service or pricing. And that's always the last resort, but we try to never not provide a solution for you, but it may not be the solution that everyone prefers. Next slide. Relationships. Again, that goes back to level of engagement. Just having the discussion about how you want to work with your transportation providers. On the pro side, building the relationship with the transportation provider is key. The more you engage, the more they engage. And let me give you an example. We had a vendor, a client that wanted to do an event, and they had no idea what services, what options there were in the city. They were from out of the area. They just knew they had a conference with 2,000 people, and they wanted to have excursions. They wanted to go on boat rides, go to dine around, go see a show. So because we had an in-depth conversation, we worked more as partners, we were able to then refer them to our other partners to help service their event. So they were able to get referrals for all of the outings that they needed and able to put the whole conference week together in totality. Breaking is not taking advantage of unknown options. We all know that there can be issues with events that are foreseen, things that maybe we planned that didn't execute as well as we thought they would. But another severe break or con is things that are unknown, things that were never discovered, to know that there was an option. For instance, working with your transportation provider to know that if you're doing something that may get assistance from the local police department because there is no accessibility on the streets where the vehicles are running. That's something that if the transportation company is aware or is able to have that conversation, they can reach out to their security partners to be able to get that support. So once your event executes, it'll run more seamlessly. So as we're wrapping up, we gave you just a really quick overview of some of the ways that transportation can make or break your event. There are a few outliers, which I left on the last two slides, just for informational purposes. Because transportation, that is another reason why we did the video, because transportation is a global conversation. In most cases, your guests are coming from all different parts of the world, or they're going to all different parts of the world, and you have to take those differences into consideration in your planning phase. The sooner the better. Keeping up to date with different updates or policies in the environment that may impact, again, their accessibility, tariffs, clearances, passport, travel restrictions are all important when discussing transportation for events. We had a conference last year where the global community was coming, and it was estimated the year prior that we would have an attendance of about 10,000. And that attendance was cut to about two-thirds of that projected amount because of different things that happened in the environment that reduced accessibility. So I just put that there for informational purposes, but it is important to always take into consideration this event. So everything in all of these slides that we have discussed so far, and believe it or not, even in the video, will all land you to your transportation offer and their recommendation. Typically, that is what is present in their quote or the proposal, which is where they sum up all of this information that they were able to gather throughout these slides, either in a conversation, through experience or history, or in just research, and then put together your presentation package. And that offer is, again, very crucial because that's the beginning of the conversation for the planning to prevent transmission. That's it. Is there any questions?
This is Andrea. I do have a question. I do corporate outings. I did a team outing for a law firm, and I had asked for we were doing staggered departure time because we were going to a baseball game. And again, where I work, it's right across the street from a sports arena, so the buses weren't allowed to sit. They had to find a parking space, and then we had to wait for the employees of the law firm to come downstairs. Well, needless to say, the first bus that left wasn't that full, so by the time the second bus pulled off, I asked for a 42-passenger bus. I got a 36-passenger bus. So I was not a happy camper, to say the least. And then since we were doing staggered departure times, I had to send that one bus off and then wait for them to bring me another bus so I can get everyone off by the last bus run. The problem came in, people who RSVP'd for a seat on the bus showed up, and then you also had people who didn't RSVP show up because they wanted to take the bus to the game. How do I, in the future, because going with a larger bus, I didn't want it to be empty because it's going to cost more money, but then at the same time, I didn't want to have a smaller bus and not have enough seats. So how would I manage that better?
So the first thing is, and I think we talked about it briefly on a few slides up, we talked about staffing. So it sounds to me in this particular case, and maybe others can tell me, that you work as kind of like the transportation liaison for your event when your company hosts events. So you basically work as what we call a greeter. Anytime we're planning events, especially ones that require shuttling, we always recommend that you either hire one of the transportation providers on-site staffer, or you have someone who is solely dedicated to the transportation. Because what ends up happening is when you're working as the dispatcher, as well as the greeter, as well as your normal role, which is hostess, you don't have the opportunity to manage the driver and the dispatching of the driver. So what ends up happening is you're counting people, you're working the guest list or the RSVP list or the wait list, whichever one you have, and then you're also trying to stage the bus close enough in proximity so that he can do his roundabout, do another drop. All of those things should have been handed off to a dedicated person that would work only with the driver and dispatch and staging. And they would be responsible for collecting the time, doing the roundabout. The first thing that they do, and just to back up a little bit, when you have your venue, which is the pickup location, where the event's taking place, so let's say the baseball stadium, was it Nat Stadium?
Right, it was Nat Stadium. We were leaving from my office, well, you know where my office is, on F Street, going down to Nat Stadium, which is only like a 15, 20-minute ride. In traffic, it's a little longer than that. The problem, I still fault the law firm because they should have made it really clear to their employees, if you do not sign up for a seat on the bus, you don't get to go on the bus.
Right. And that's okay because the person who is there for the transportation could have made that clear to them as well. But the first thing that we would do is once you make the reservation, the person on the other end would then take that and load it into Google Maps. And yes, they would come up with a timing for the bus, especially if you stated that you want to do shuttling, because they need to do the roundabout. And yes, we need to extend that time to account for traffic because we all know going over the bridge midday DC is insane. And I would not have probably planned that at 15 minutes because, again, going from your office to that stadium, you're hitting two waves of traffic, one on the bridge and one on the other side. So we probably should have made that about 30 each way. So there's really it's a hard way to have one one bus for you to do a roundabout pickup twice within an hour. That's cutting it very close. But the second thing is, what I would suggest you do in the future is either set up your team so that there is one that has, especially if you're doing shuttling. If you're doing shuttling in the city when there's traffic potential at a venue as popular as Nat Stadium, you have to have someone dedicated to transportation because they're the person that's going to be on the phone simultaneously with dispatch and with the driver. And they're going to be keeping timings because the driver can't talk when he's driving. So you'll be on the phone with dispatch to get his out time. They can track the buses. Most providers can track the buses. And they'll be able to give you an ETA on his arrival time at either place. You have someone then that's dedicated to the guests and accounting for the bus, managing the manifest of who is already registered for the bus, and then advising those that have not signed up that they are on the wait list. And then creating, if you had not prepped for it, create one there on site. You start counting 1, 2, 3, just like that. Once you fill that bus, then the other passengers get access to the bus. But because everyone is witnessing this happen, and again, we want to try and plan for it, but I understand that you can't sometimes. It can be overlooked. We're human. But when you involve everyone in the process and you make them aware of what you're doing, you'll find that most guests will be okay with that outcome. Because the people who did not register would most often feel like they don't want to circumvent those that did, and those that did will see that you're not letting people who didn't on before them. So, but they need to see that you're at least managing the piece. And the way that I would suggest managing the piece is to separate the two.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that help? Was there any other questions?
No, we're good? Nobody else have anything?
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kimberly. We appreciate your time tonight, and we appreciate, the effort you put into the presentation here, so we all have a good clue as to what we should be doing in transportation needs. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to everybody in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.